My son Wesley stood at the head of the conference table in his brand new office and introduced me to a room full of investors as our early backer. Not his mother. Not the woman who sold her house in Tucson to fund his dream. Just our early backer, like I was a line item on a spreadsheet instead of the person who raised him. I didn't say anything. I smiled and nodded the way mothers learn to do when their hearts are breaking quietly in public. But that night, driving home alone through the dark streets of Nashville, I made a decision I had been avoiding for months. I want to tell you this story honestly. Not to make Wesley look like a villain, because the truth is more complicated than that. And not to make myself look like a saint, because I made mistakes too. I'm telling you this because I think a lot of people watching have been in some version of this room. Have smiled and nodded while someone they loved more than anything treated their sacrifice like furniture. Background. Expected. Invisible. My name is Dorothy Haynes. I am 63 years old. I live alone now in a rented apartment in East Nashville, with a cat named Biscuit and a window box of herbs I talk to more than I probably should. For most of my adult life, I was a bookkeeper. Not glamorous work, but steady, honest work that I was good at. Numbers always made sense to me in a way that people sometimes didn't. My husband Leonard died 6 years ago from pancreatic cancer. He was diagnosed in March and gone by August. That's how fast that particular cruelty works. One season you're planning a trip to see the fall colors in Vermont, and the next season you're learning how to sleep on only one side of a bed because the other side is too loud with absence. Leonard was a good man, generous without making a production of it. He fixed things with his hands, kept promises without being reminded, and loved Wesley with the quiet ferocity of a father who didn't need applause for it. He left us, our house, a modest savings account and a life insurance policy that wasn't enormous but was enough if I stayed careful. I wrote that phrase on a notepad the week after his funeral and stuck it to the refrigerator. I looked at it every morning. Wesley was our only child. He had Leonard's dark eyes and my tendency to talk too fast when he was excited about something. From the time he was in high school, he wanted to build things, not with his hands like his father, but with code, software, systems. He could spend 14 hours in front of a screen and emerge energized instead of depleted, which I never fully understood but always admired. He studied computer science in college, graduated early, and spent his late 20s working for other people's companies while quietly sketching ideas for his own. I want to be honest about something. I adored my son. Not blindly, not foolishly, but deeply, the way you love someone you watched take their first breath. When Wesley was 9, he came home from school, crying because a kid in his class told him his science project was stupid. I stayed up until 2 a.m. helping him rebuild it, not because I understood the project, but because I couldn't stand watching him doubt himself. That was always my weakness. His doubt hurt me more than my own pain ever did. 3 years ago, Wesley called me on a Sunday evening. His voice had that particular energy I recognized from childhood. High and quick and slightly breathless. Like the idea inside him was moving faster than his words could contain it. "Mom," he said, "I need to tell you about something." He had spent 8 months developing a software platform for small construction companies, project management, budgeting, subcontractor scheduling, all integrated in one place. He had done the research. He had talked to contractors. He had built a working prototype on his own time, late nights and weekends, without telling anyone except his girlfriend, Nadine. "I really think this is it," he said. I stared out my kitchen window at Leonard's old bird feeder, still hanging from the oak tree even though I never remembered to fill it anymore. "Tell me everything," I said. And he did, for almost 2 hours, and by the end of it, I believed him. God help me, I believed every single word. Over the next several months, I transferred money I had saved for 15 years into Wesley's business, $50,000 from my savings account, $20,000 from the life insurance policy. And eventually, after Wesley explained the market opportunity was closing, after he said the right moment would pass if they couldn't move quickly, I sold the house in Tucson. The house Leonard and I bought together when Wesley was 3 years old. The house with the cracked tile in the hallway that we never fixed because we kept disagreeing about which color to replace it with. I sold that house and wired the proceeds to my son's startup. The company was called BuildPath. And for a while, everything looked the way hopeful things look before you see clearly. Wesley sent me monthly updates. New users, new contractors testing the platform, interest from investors. He called more often. He asked my opinion on things, not the software, but the business decisions, the contracts, the terms. Those were the best conversations we'd had since Leonard died. Then Nadine's brother came into the picture. His name was Fletcher Gaines. I met him for the first time at a dinner Wesley hosted at his apartment to celebrate BuildPath's first paying customers. Fletcher arrived carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and wearing the kind of easy confidence that fills a room before it earns the right to. He was 34, Wesley's age, and worked in what he described as growth strategy consulting. He had done it for tech companies in Austin and Charlotte, and was now, as he put it, very excited about what Wesley was building. He shook my hand warmly. "You must be the visionary behind the visionary," he said. At the time, I thought it was charming. Looking back, I recognize it as the first signal I ignored. Because he didn't call me Wesley's mother, he called me something that acknowledged my financial role while assigning it a flattering label. Within 6 weeks of that dinner, Fletcher Gaines was involved in almost every major decision at BuildPath. He had a title, Head of Strategic Growth, and he and Wesley were in near constant contact. The weekly update calls I used to get from Wesley became less frequent. When I did hear from my son, the language had changed. He talked about user acquisition funnels and B2B vertical positioning and enterprise pricing anchoring. Things that I, a 60-year-old bookkeeper, was not supposed to understand. And I think that was partly the point. One afternoon, I drove to Nashville to meet Wesley for lunch. We used to do this at least once a month, just the two of us, at a diner near his apartment that made a turkey club he had loved since college. I arrived early. While I waited at the table, I overheard Wesley on the phone just outside the front window. He was laughing at something Fletcher had said. Easy laughter, relaxed, happy. The kind of laughter I used to hear when he talked to me. When he came inside and sat down, he hugged me quickly and immediately opened his laptop. Fletcher pulled in a connection from Austin, he said. Potential enterprise client. Could be huge. I looked at the menu even though I already knew what I was ordering. How are you? I asked. Good, yeah. Busy. He was already typing something. Wesley. I asked how you are. He looked up slightly startled like the question had come from somewhere unexpected. I'm good, Mom. Really good. Things are moving. Things are moving. That phrase replaced how are you for the next several months. The money requests started changing around that time, not in frequency, but in nature. The early requests had been specific. Server costs, legal fees, software licenses. I understood those. The newer requests were larger and harder to trace. A $60,000 payment to a firm called Gaines Growth Partners for enterprise sales strategy. An $18,000 retainer for what the invoice described as executive positioning services. A $32,000 commitment to a branding overhaul. Wesley told me was critical before they approached larger investors. I asked about Gaines Growth Partners specifically because the name concerned me. That's Fletcher's consulting group, Wesley said. I set down the phone bill I had been sorting. Fletcher is billing BuildPath through his own company. That's how consultants work, Mom. How much has gone to his company total? There was a pause, the kind of pause I had learned to notice after 40 years of bookkeeping. I'd have to pull the records. Please do, I said. He never sent them. The evening I remember most clearly was a Thursday in October. I had driven to Nashville for what Wesley described as a casual dinner with some members of the BuildPath team. I arrived to find 12 people sitting around a restaurant table, several of whom I had never met. Fletcher was at the far end beside a woman named Irene Calloway, who Wesley told me was a potential lead investor from Charlotte. Fletcher was talking and everyone near him was laughing. Wesley sat me at the middle of the table. Not beside him. In the middle, between two young employees I had never met who were kind but clearly surprised I was there. Partway through dinner, Irene Calloway leaned across the table toward Wesley and gestured toward me politely. "And who's this?" she asked pleasantly. Wesley smiled. "That's my mom. She helped us get started." I looked at the breadbasket for a long moment. Not at Wesley, not at the investor, just at the breadskit, because I needed something ordinary to anchor myself to while the rest of the evening continued around me. After Irene left, Wesley was energized. He talked about her portfolio and her timeline and what a relationship with her firm could mean for BuildPath. I drove home that night with the heater running in my old Civic and the radio off, and my hands very steady on the wheel. I did not cry until I was inside my apartment with the door locked behind me. Then I cried for a long time, not because of what Wesley had said, but because of what he hadn't said. Because 1.5 years earlier, he had called me on a Sunday evening with a voice full of breathless excitement, and I had stayed on the phone for 2 hours and believed every word. And somewhere between that Sunday evening and this Thursday dinner, I had become someone who helped us get started. A few weeks later, Wesley called on a Tuesday morning with an urgency I hadn't heard from him in months. Not the good kind of urgency, the other kind. "We have an opportunity," he said, "but the timing window is narrow." He explained that a venture capital group in Atlanta was willing to offer a convertible note. Funding now, with the option to convert to equity later. But they needed to see stronger capitalization on the books before finalizing terms. "What does that mean in plain language?" I asked. "It means if you could transfer another 100,000, it would significantly strengthen our position." I sat very still at my kitchen table. Outside, rain was coming down steadily over Nashville. Biscuit was sitting on the windowsill watching it. "Wesley," I said carefully, "I don't have $100,000. You have the IRA?" The IRA Leonard and I had built over 31 years of contributions, the account I had promised myself I would not touch until I was 65. "There would be early withdrawal penalties," I said. "The return on this would dwarf the penalties." I looked at Biscuit on the windowsill. He flicked his tail once and looked back at me with the calm, uncommitted expression of someone who has no stake in the answer. "I need to see the full financial records before I make any decision like that," I said. Wesley exhaled. Not sharply, not angrily, just slowly, the way someone exhales when a conversation is going in a direction they didn't plan for. "Mom, you've seen the updates. The monthly summaries aren't the same as full financial records. Why are you suddenly making this complicated?" Suddenly, that word landed strangely, as though my concern arrived out of nowhere. As though I hadn't been asking about Gaines Growth Partners for 2 months without receiving an answer. "I'm not making it complicated," I said. "I'm asking to see where the money has gone." There was a silence long enough to become its own answer. "I'll send you what I can," Wesley said. He never did. That week, I called my oldest friend, a woman named Barbara Novak, who had been my closest friend since we worked together at an accounting firm in 1987. Barbara was practical in the way that people become practical after surviving a difficult divorce and raising 3 kids largely alone. She did not soften things. She loved me, but she did not soften things. She arrived on Saturday morning with coffee and a set expression on her face that told me she had already guessed this wasn't a social visit. I told her everything. The money, the house, the changing tone of Wesley's calls, the dinner where I sat in the middle of the table, the invoice from Gaines Growth Partners, the unanswered request for records. Barbara listened without interrupting. She was very good at that. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Fletcher Gaines is billing the company he's advising through his own firm," she said slowly. "Yes. And Wesley owns what percentage of BuildPath? 60%. Fletcher's arrangement gave him an advisory equity stake." Barbara set down her coffee. "How much?" 15%. Fat Dorothy." She said my name the way she did when she was about to tell me something I didn't want to hear. "That man has a financial interest in every dollar BuildPath spends, and he's also the one recommending how the dollars get spent." I already understood it intellectually, but hearing Barbara say it out loud made it feel different. Solid. Real. She spent the next 2 hours helping me go through every financial document I had. Bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, the PDF summaries Wesley had sent. The picture that emerged was not the one I had been handed. Total payments to Gaines Growth Partners in 14 months. $112,000. An amount that had never appeared as a single line item in any of Wesley's updates to me. It had been distributed across different invoice descriptions. Sales strategy, market research, executive consulting, brand development. Scattered across categories so no single number would draw the eye. "That's not incompetence," Barbara said quietly. I didn't answer because I knew she was right. The following week, I drove to a small financial advisory firm downtown and sat across from a woman named Janet Ose, a certified financial planner who came recommended by my doctor. She was in her early 50s, calm, methodical, with reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain around her neck. She reminded me a little of a version of myself I might have been if I had made different choices 30 years ago. Janet reviewed the documents I brought. She asked careful questions. She did not tell me what to think, but she helped me see what I was looking at. The structuring of the consulting payments is designed to avoid threshold reporting, she said. I'm not saying it's illegal, but it's not accidental. And the equity stake? I asked. She set down the papers slowly. A 15% stake with advisory rights in a company, still relying heavily on outside family capital, creates a significant misalignment of incentives. I looked out her office window at the gray November sky over Nashville. My son approved all of this, I said. Janet looked at me carefully. Did he design it, or did he agree to it? That question stayed with me all the way home. I did not transfer money from the IRA. I did not answer the next 2 calls from Wesley asking about the Atlanta investor timeline. I sat in my apartment for several evenings rereading documents and drinking tea I didn't finish. And thinking about a question Barbara had asked me the first morning she came over. Dorothy? She had said, "Why do you think you kept giving more every time Wesley asked?" I had answered quickly, "Because I believed in him." Barbara had nodded slowly. "And when he stopped believing in you, did that change how much you gave?" I hadn't been able to answer that. I still couldn't, entirely. But I was beginning to understand something about myself that was uncomfortable to look at directly. I had spent the years since Leonard died quietly terrified of becoming irrelevant to my son, of becoming the mother he called on holidays and birthdays and at no other time. Every check I wrote, on some level, I was also writing to stay close to him, and Wesley, whether he knew it consciously or not, had learned what that was worth. On a Wednesday evening in late November, Wesley showed up at my apartment unannounced. He had driven 3 hours from Nashville, and he looked tired in a way that reminded me of how he looked during college exam weeks. He stood in my doorway with his jacket damp from rain, and his expression trying to be casual and not quite managing it. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped back and let him in. He sat at my small kitchen table, the same tables I had been sitting at for weeks, with bank statements and unanswered questions. Biscuit jumped into the chair beside him immediately. Wesley scratched the cat's ears out of habit, the way he had since Biscuit was a kitten, and something about that ordinary gesture made my throat tighten. "The Atlanta deal fell through," he said. I waited. "Fletcher says we can restructure the approach, target a different firm." He was looking at the cat, not at me. "But we need to show stronger numbers." "Wesley," I said. "I asked for financial records 6 weeks ago." He exhaled. "I know. You didn't send them. Things have been moving fast. You told the investor woman at dinner that I helped you get started." He looked up then, something shifted behind his eyes. "That's not. I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "How did you mean it?" He didn't answer right away. Outside, rain tapped against the window the way it always seemed to in the difficult conversations of my life. "Mom, I'm under a lot of pressure right now." "I know you are," I said quietly, "and I want to understand it. But every time I ask a specific question, I get a general answer. And every time I ask about Fletcher's invoices, the subject changes." Wesley rubbed both hands over his face. He looked young when he did that. He had looked young doing that same gesture since he was 12 years old. "Fletcher is essential to where BuildPath is going," he said. "Fletcher's company has received over $100,000 from BuildPath in 14 months. Wesley went still. "How do you know that number?" "Because I added up the invoices." A long silence. "He earns his fees," Wesley said finally. "I'm sure he believes that." "Mom, does he earn them whether the company grows or not?" Wesley looked away. That small movement told me more than an answer would have. I reached into the folder I had kept on the counter and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. The list of payments to Gaines Growth Partners that Barbara and I had compiled. Wesley looked at it for a long time without speaking. "You've been going through the financials without telling me," he said. "You wouldn't send them to me. Those are business records that I funded." He pushed the paper back toward me, not angrily, but definitively. "Fletcher's compensation is structured based on growth milestones. That's standard. His fees increased every quarter that spending increased because spending increased to drive growth, or because he recommended the spending. Wesley stood up. He paced once toward the window and back. He had Leonard's walk. That had always undone me a little. I know this looks bad from the outside, he said. Wesley, I sold your father's house. The room went quiet. He turned to look at me. For the first time since he arrived, his expression broke slightly at the edges. I know, he said softly. I sold the house where you grew up. I used the money from your father's life insurance. I withdrew from savings I spent 30 years building. I kept my voice steady because I had decided before he arrived that I would not cry tonight. And I have never once asked you to make me feel that was worth it. I only asked to see where the money went. Wesley sat back down slowly. He looked like someone who had just been reminded of a fact he had been working very hard not to think about. Fletcher says family investors get emotionally entangled in operational decisions, he said. But his voice had changed. Lower, less certain. And what do you say? I asked. He didn't answer for a while. Then, quietly, I think I've let him do most of my saying for me lately. Something shifted in the room when he admitted that. Not a resolution, not a reconciliation. Just a small crack of honesty and a very long stretch of avoidance. I told him I was not transferring any more money, that I needed complete financial records, that I needed an independent review of Gaines Growth Partners invoices before anything else was discussed. Wesley didn't argue. He looked exhausted and a little frightened in a way I hadn't seen since Leonard died. He left around 10 o'clock. I stood at the window and watched his car pull out of the parking lot and disappear down the wet street. Then I went and sat in Leonard's chair. The armchair we kept because it was the one he sat in every evening to read. I still kept it by the window, even though it made no particular sense in this apartment. I stayed there for a long time, not sleeping, just sitting, while rain whispered against the glass and biscuit settled heavily into my lap. 3 weeks later, Barbara helped me arrange a meeting with Janet Ossie and a business attorney she recommended, a man named Stuart Polk, who had spent 20 years untangling small company disputes. We met on a Thursday morning in Stuart's conference room with all the documents I had gathered over the previous 2 months spread across the table. Stuart reviewed everything methodically. He asked me clear questions and wrote down the answers in a yellow legal pad, in a handwriting so small I could barely read it upside down. When he finished reading, he set his pen down and folded his hands. The consulting contract structure is ethically aggressive, he said carefully. Whether it rises to actionable fraud depends on what the original agreement said and what representations were made to you when you invested. Fletcher was introduced as a growth advisor, I said. I was never told he had an equity stake until after it was granted. Stuart and Janet exchanged a brief look. Were you represented by counsel when you made your initial investment? No. He nodded slowly. Mrs. Haynes, I want you to understand something clearly. You have standing here. Not unlimited standing, but real standing. And I think it's worth investigating before you make any additional decisions. I looked down at my hands folded on the conference table. Leonard used to say that I had the most capable hands of anyone he knew. He meant it as a compliment about my bookkeeping, but I always took it as something larger. My son didn't intend to hurt me, I said. Stuart looked at me carefully. I believe you. The question isn't intent. The question is what happened and what the options are moving forward. Wesley called while I was driving home from that meeting. I let it go to voicemail. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex and played the message. His voice was different, quieter. He said he had gone through the financial records himself, really gone through them, for the first time in months. He said some things didn't look the way he thought they looked. He said he had asked Fletcher directly about the equity agreement and the consulting fee structure. He said Fletcher's answers had not satisfied him. He said he needed to talk to me. Not about money, just to talk. I listened to the message twice. Then I called him back. He answered on the first ring. I'm sorry, he said. Before anything else. Just that. Mom, I'm so sorry. It was not a dramatic apology. He didn't cry, though his voice was unsteady. He talked for a long time, honestly, in a way he hadn't talked to me in over a year. He told me he had gotten swept up in the version of his company that Fletcher kept describing. Always one meeting away from the breakthrough. Always one investment away from the turning point. He said he had stopped looking closely at the numbers because Fletcher made him feel like looking closely was a sign of small thinking. He told me founders who question every expense never build anything lasting, Wesley said. And you believe that? I wanted to. That honesty cost him something. I could hear it. Wesley, I said, why didn't you introduce me as your mother at that dinner? A long pause. Because Fletcher said family money carries a stigma with institutional investors, he said finally. He said if I acknowledged it up front, people would assume the company hadn't attracted real capital. I was quiet for a moment. So you were ashamed of me? No. His voice cracked slightly. I was ashamed that I needed you. There's a difference. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. I thought about Leonard. About how Leonard would have handled this, with his steady hands and his patience and his absolute intolerance of dishonesty, dressed up as opportunity. He would have asked one clear question early, and not moved past it until he had one clear answer. He would not have let ambition outrun accountability. I had known that, and I had funded the dream anyway, and somewhere along the way, I had stopped asking the clear questions because I was afraid of what the answers might cost me. We both made mistakes. That's the truth that doesn't fit neatly into a story about a mother and a son and a man named Fletcher Gaines. It doesn't fit, but it's true. Stuart Polk's investigation took 6 weeks. What he found was that Fletcher Gaines had used similar consulting structures with 2 other small companies in the previous 4 years. One had settled privately. One was still unresolved. The consulting fees he had charged BuildPath were not unambiguously illegal, but the non-disclosure of his equity stake to me as a primary investor was a more complicated matter. Given the representations made when I came on board, Fletcher agreed to a negotiated settlement that returned a portion of the consulting fees to BuildPath's accounts and removed his equity stake entirely. There was no public litigation, no dramatic courtroom scene, just a quiet unraveling, the way most of these things actually end. Not with justice exactly, with a reckoning, which is different and smaller and still meaningful. Wesley wound BuildPath down 6 months later. The technology was sound, but the financing had been too entangled and the market had shifted. He took a position at a mid-sized software firm in Nashville, writing code again, which I think was quietly a relief to him, though he didn't say so directly. The money I lost, most of it, I lost. I want to be clear about that. I am not going to tell you that it came back, or that it was fine in the end, or that the lessons were worth the cost. The house in Tucson is gone. The savings account is significantly reduced. I work part-time now, 2 days a week, at a small nonprofit helping with their books, which keeps me useful and pays modestly and suits me more than I expected. What I can tell you is what changed between Wesley and me. It changed slowly. Nothing fixes quickly after that kind of fracture, and I think anyone who tells you it does is selling something. But slowly and genuinely, it changed. The first real moment came about 2 months after the settlement, on a Sunday afternoon in February. Wesley drove down from Nashville alone, and we went to visit Leonard's grave together for the first time since the funeral. We stood there in the cold for a while without talking. Then Wesley said something I have thought about many times since. I think I was trying to prove something to Dad, he said. And I used you to do it. I looked at the headstone. Leonard's name and the years of his life and a line he had asked us to use, a sentence from a book he loved. He tried to leave things better than he found them. Your father would have told you the same thing I've been trying to tell you, I said. That you were already someone worth knowing before you built anything. Wesley's jaw tightened the way it does when he is trying not to cry in front of me. We stood there a while longer. Then we drove to a diner and ate soup and talked about ordinary things. His apartment. My Herbs, a movie we had both seen and disagreed about. Normal things, quietly, tentatively normal. He calls me on Sundays now. Not every Sunday, but most of them. Sometimes we talk for 5 minutes and sometimes for an hour. He asks how I am and waits for the answer. That sounds like a small thing. It isn't a small thing. Last spring, I found a box of Wesley's childhood drawings in the back of my closet while I was reorganizing. Rocket ships and animals, and one very ambitious attempt at a portrait of Leonard that looked more like an oval with a mustache than anything else. I texted Wesley a photo of it, and he sent back a laughing emoji, and then called me 20 minutes later, still laughing. That phone call lasted 2 hours. We didn't talk about BuildPath or Fletcher Gaines or money or any of it. We talked about Leonard, about memories I had forgotten, and ones he had held on to that I didn't know he still carried. About the time Leonard stayed up all night in the driveway, teaching Wesley to change a car's brake pads by flashlight. About the way Leonard used to make Saturday morning pancakes in the specific order of buttermilk first, always buttermilk first, and get quietly annoyed if anyone suggested a variation. By the end of it, I was crying and Wesley was close to it, and Biscuit was sitting on my chest demanding attention with the total indifference to timing that is a cat's particular gift. "I miss him," Wesley said. "Me too," I said. "Every day." We were both quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry I made everything so much harder," Wesley said. "I'm sorry I kept letting you," I answered. That's probably the most honest thing I said in this whole story. Because love without limits isn't wisdom. It's fear wearing the name of devotion. I was afraid of losing my son. And in that fear, I made it easier for both of us to become versions of ourselves we didn't recognize. The lesson, if there is one, is not that you should stop believing in the people you love. Believe in them. Show up for them. Be the person who answers the phone at 11 at night and stays on the line. But belief is not the same as a blank check, and love is not the same as endless rescue. The most honest thing you can give someone you love is not your money or your silence or your compliance. It's your presence, your clarity, and when it becomes necessary, your no. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, please leave a comment below. I read everyone. Tell me where you're watching from today and what time it is there. And if this reached you, I hope you'll subscribe to Quiet Tears Stories, because every week I share something true.